Have you ever been walking around a game's map and found yourself bombarded by random notifications and those little things to go collect on the side that are simply put just being shoved directly in your face? This is an example of horrible UI in most cases. The last thing that I want when I'm walking from A to B to go and complete that side quest or to just explore the world is being told about those 10 different viewpoints I could go get, 15 different collectibles within the vicinity of where I'm at, and once I finally get to the location of B, for some reason they're giving me 3 new side quests without much reason. However, I also don't want to be given next to no information and have no clue if I've been given a new side quest or some NPC is just talking to me for zero reason. UI can affect you in many ways, from your quest log looking clean and actually giving you information that's valuable but not giving you too much, all the way through to being able to understand your enemies' locations even better when you're running around a new Call of Duty map. So let's sit down and discuss how UI affects games and the way you interact with them. UI, or more commonly known as user interface, what exactly is it and how do we end up using it? UI can span from the very simple start playing screen all the way through to the minimap that you're going to be staring at for half of your TDM lobby. UI is meant to guide the player around the game in some manner, from choosing your difficulty slider to knowing something is close by and you can go and explore it. When most of us think of UI, most of us will be thinking about the display HUD that you will typically be staring at for a good amount of time during any playthrough. You have some examples of good game HUDs from Elden Ring, Skyrim, and Ghost of Tsushima. And before we end up continuing on, I think we need to just clarify what I would class as a good game hub. These 3 games have one thing in common, and that is that they all give you information that you need to be able to play the game, such as your stamina, your health, and they also give you a compass. However, they don't take up a ton of space and give you tons of useless information all at the same time. This is just from the HUD's perspective though, as these 3 games do have some form of flaw within them at some point within their UI. Games with bad HUDs are the likes of Horizon Zero Dawn and the Assassin's Creed franchise. The significant primary distinction between the likes of the previously mentioned titles and these games is that the likes of Horizon, you'll find that 1/6 to even 1/5 of your display is covered by information, whether it's useful or not, and typically it's not. However, most of the time it is down to the player of whether or not they believe the information is needed and if it actually needs to be displayed to them. And even then, the games that come from Assassin's Creed and the Horizon series typically could have their HUDs made a little bit smaller so it doesn't take up as much space. The Assassin's Creed franchise uses UI in the same way that a mobile game does, where it just bombards you with a ton of information because it thinks that people just, need all of this and it's going to make the game way more interesting. However, the HUD, as I mentioned, isn't all what UI design is about a game. However, it is probably one of the biggest components. Outside of the HUD, we then also have the general interface with quest logs, character descriptions, and gear menus. Skyrim is a clear example of a game that has a UI designed solely for console players, which is why Sky UI is such a popular mod. The original UI for PC players is somewhat of a tragedy to try and navigate through, due to the clunkiness of the whole thing being designed solely for console players. Whereas the Sky UI mod allows people to navigate through the inventory in a way that is easier to see everything all at once, and makes the usage of your mouse way smoother. Throughout this video, I intend to talk about all kinds of UI, from the likes of the minimap in many games out there, to the skill trees and quest logs and how they can overwhelm many players. With that, I'll also be discussing multiplayer and single player games, as they both have vastly different requirements to the average player. For example, an open world RPG doesn't require a minimap, whereas a game like Call of Duty has a minimap that can be so useful that all good players will spend at least 40% of their time looking at it. The key difference is that when you're playing a game of hardpoint, you actually need the information to be adequately decent at the game and play it in a competitive manner. Whereas when you're walking around an open world game, many that do have minimaps, you'll often find people staring at the minimap way too much and losing their actual immersion from playing the game because the minimap gives them so much information. However, one point that I think needs to be spoken about within this video is going to be the financial incentive of companies to have, in a way, bad UI in many of the menus. Such as most of the online games that you play, from having battle passes right next to that home menu, or why when you load up a game like Destiny, it will tell you all about all of the recent things that you should buy and how you should buy all of the in-game currency. What is good and bad is going to be subjective, so I think the first place to start is going to be listing off some games within each category and explaining a little bit on what traits I'd characterize as bad design. And like I said, I'm going to first start with classifying what the negatives are, as this will kind of inform us on what the counter to this would be. And in my opinion, the first and foremost thing when it comes to any form of game is the abundance of information. A game that has an absurd amount of information would be something within, let's say, the MOBA genre. However, within that, and within the context of it, it makes sense. However, it doesn't make sense within the likes of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. For me to explain a little bit further on why I would say Odyssey gives way too much information to the player, I have to first talk about what I would classify as required information. So if you're going to be playing an open world, you're going to need a few things, but not necessarily a load of stuff. With a game like Odyssey, you're going to end up fighting quite often, so obviously you're going to need a health bar. The enemy's health, most likely, a stamina bar, and an ability. However, that should only come up, in my opinion, and be triggered when you go to attempt using that ability. If you're using something like a bow and arrow, then that should be shown, but only once you actually use it, or maybe when you get down to your last 3 instead. Or even if you want to give people the ability to, I'd say even allowing people to click something on the D-pad so that they can see the whole HUD in one go, then that would be a better option than, let's say, displaying everything all the time. And then the last thing that I'd probably say is mostly needed in most games anyway, is going to be your compass. However, many can actually get away with it if they didn't want to have it. For a game like Odyssey, for those to be the required information that's being given to you, it would mean that you'd end up removing everything from the constant sharing of what abilities you have available, the level that you are, the quests that you're following, and the objective within the local area. And for some, I'd probably say even getting rid of the stamina bar until you're down to like 25%. This would mean that there'll be a lot less clutter, and the only time that you'll be needing to think about those extras is either when it's necessary, like stamina dumping on a boss, or when you're intentionally looking at it or looking at your level to see it within your perk slots. Now, does it mean the whole UI is awful? No, I actually think there's elements of this skill tree, for example, that actually is more streamlined and easier to understand at a quick glance than something like Skyrim. However, the way that the HUD looks, the clutter it allows, and the awful cultist menu is what I would say makes this game have objectively bad UI. Another game that I don't think has amazing UI, but is passable, is a game like Elden Ring. Elden Ring, in my opinion, should have had a quest log menu, at minimum. I do believe that for this, it ends up putting a lot of players off because they either don't know when they're being given a side quest, or let's say they take a day or two off and they've now forgotten exactly what they were doing. However, the other area that I would say isn't necessarily user-friendly for the majority of players would be something like their stat upgrade menu. It's definitely something that for the players who really like their numbers, really deep down, and they're looking for every nitty-gritty detail, it looks great. However, for the general player, it's a skill tree that just isn't appealing to look at and looks like you're looking at a maths textbook. However, this game definitely does have a good HUD. You're definitely not overloaded by any information in this game. At times it can be difficult for many players to find things that are hidden in random spots, but it also allows the player the satisfaction of running across things completely at random. So this game definitely sacrifices what many people have come to know within the open world genre, like question marks on your map and the little dots on your compass, for that feeling of truly wandering around a world and seeing something for the first time. Then you have a game like Ghost of Tsushima that has a really great UI from the HUD all the way through to its menus. It looks and feels like the same gaming experience all the way through, and it allows you to feel the same sense of freedom that you get within something like Elden Ring by removing the HUD when you're travelling around and only having the wind guide you. Unlike an AC game where, for example, you can just put your horse into auto sprint and it will follow a white line on the floor. So with that, I think I've given you a decent idea into what I would consider bad UI. Primarily around the idea of giving us way too much information, but also it can be bad when you're giving players way too little information. However, all of this is within the setting of single-player titles, so let's spend some time talking about 2 games real quick. Rainbow Six and The Division 2. Both of these games are made by Ubisoft, and both games are Tom Clancy games. However, they are 2 different genres and both deal with information to the player differently. Within The Division 2, the HUD is way too big and provides an absurd amount of information to the player. It tells you your basic information that you might need, such as your health bar, your timer, and how long your equipment will be until it's available again. However, it also shows you your objectives for the week, your teammates' health, and their timers for their abilities. It also tells you multiple objectives within that set thing that you're doing, if there is multiple objectives. It then has a timer with an overall percentage bar, and the cherry on top is that it will tell you how much critical damage you've done, and all manners of extra damage buffs. It's a massive amount of information that either doesn't need to be there, or at the very least could be brought down in size, to not be the main thing that you're staring at when you're playing their game. You might have noticed that I didn't talk about the minimap, and that is because I intend to talk a lot more about it extensively later on about how maps can change the way you play the game. Rainbow Six though, on the other hand, I would say has got a lot more of a streamlined version for a competitive FPS. It tells you your ammo amounts, your teammates' health, and who's alive. The timer for the bombs running out, the objective points, and the smaller area that tells you exactly what button to click when you want to choose specific things. The two big differences for a game like this and The Division is that for a competitive FPS, this is all completely required. And one of the other things is that it takes up way less room than The Division, when The Division doesn't even need half the information that's on the screen. And that's a very easy way to just kind of look at each game and how each one has similar information being provided to the player, but doesn't necessarily need to be there. It may not fit the genre, size of your HUD, and so on, and it affects the gaming experience by making you look at all of that way too much instead of truly wandering around the world they've created. One is useful, however the other one is just a little bit too much information. So let's dive a little bit deeper. I've been talking about UI in particular within this video, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about audio. And not just any type of audio, but Corsair and Sound ID, who have kindly sponsored today's video. Corsair recently sent me out the HS80 Max, their brand new headset in their gaming lineup, and I am extremely impressed. Primarily because I stopped using gaming headsets a very long time ago because they were either really bulky, their audio quality wasn't that great, and then lastly, their quality of the actual product was really flimsy. However, I've been extremely impressed with this. Now, what's absolutely great is that they haven't actually asked me to specifically be really nice about this. This is genuinely just my impressions of using their product, and I'm someone who committed the cardinal sin of gaming, and I've been using my AirPods Max as my main audio device for any form of games for the last year. There's almost no difference in the audio quality. When you consider the price of these versus the AirPods Max, that is an absolutely extortionate difference that is just amazing to see within the likes of a gaming headset. It also comes built in with an omnidirectional mic, which is a great bonus, as I haven't been able to talk to my friends on consoles in a very long time. Even though it's a completely normal thing, it's just really refreshing to be able to do so and have good quality audio. Now, what I think is also really impressive about this is that it's got 65 hours of battery life in its Bluetooth mode, which is really great for a gaming headset. Most headsets out there are only about 50 hours or so you can get through probably a whole playthrough of Red Dead doing a load of side content with these. Now, where Sound ID comes into this is that this headset is the first Corsair headset to have Sound ID technology built in. It's a sound calibration software which will improve and tailor the sound quality of the headset based off your hearing. There is a chance that you might have some form of hearing damage, or your ears might be sensitive to certain frequencies, which this will completely solve a lot of those issues. And what I mean by this is that you're able to create a sound profile that is perfect for you. It only takes 5 minutes to set up with a quick A/B testing, which means all you need is this great headset mixed with 5 minutes of your time, and you're going to have the perfect sound experience. Now, where I've noticed some of the best moments when using this headset is with Red Dead 2, and honestly, the audio of this, just being able to hear all of it, sounds so amazing, and not having certain things backed out all the way. So for example, in Red Dead 2, when you're walking, the ground, you can't really hear it massively all the time when you're walking, and when you've tailored that experience for yourself, you can actually feel as if you are walking on the ground that's within the game. It allows you to truly get immersed into that experience. Now, if you are interested in checking out this headset and Sound ID, make sure to go check out the link down below, as they've kindly sponsored today's video. As I mentioned, make sure to go check them out if you want to support me and you also want to support them and get a good product for yourself. Then make sure to go check that out down below. And personally, I've really enjoyed using it, and one of the things that I can't wait to do is play through Ghost of Tsushima with these. And I have to say a massive thank you for Corsair and Sound ID for being the first sponsor on the channel. And now let's continue on and talk about how UI affects video games. I want to spend some time first talking about single-player titles. I'll be spending some time talking about the HUD of 4 games in particular when you are roaming around and in combat. I'll also be talking about each game's interface for the quest menus, skills, and other menus if they have any of them that are really important. The 4 games that I'm going to be using is going to be Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Red Dead Redemption 2, Elden Ring, and The Witcher 3. All 4 of these games have things that I dislike, but some more than others. I want to first focus on the HUDs of each game when you are roaming around the map. This is incredibly important in my opinion when it comes to making you feel the drive to explore within an open world title. As I mentioned earlier, I want to have as little clutter as possible on my display when I'm running around. Preferably nothing at all. But for some games, you do need something there to help you out as the average player to roam around the map. Making my way through what I would consider the worst within this department, we're going to be first talking about The Witcher 3. Now this game, for all of its amazing stories, the area it doesn't do so well in is its HUD. Yes, it gives you all the relevant information that you need for a game like this, such as your health bar, stamina bar, and when you're on your horse, the horse's stamina bar as well. But it also gives you a minimap, which in my opinion, it looks okay, but it isn't particularly that well done. It then also shows you roughly what time of day it is, it reminds you how to gallop and ride your horse, on top of permanently telling you what quest you are doing, and what you need to do, as if this is information that you need at every given moment. We then have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which gives you surprisingly less information on the HUD in this retrospect. This game will swap out the minimap for a compass. Personally, I do prefer having a compass in a game like this, however this game litters them with viewpoint markers, question marks, vendors, quest marks, and houses you can go to. Like, okay, I think this would be a perfectly acceptable thing to do if it wasn't for the fact that when you're walking around anyway, all of these things have their little markers on there as well. The vendors have theirs, the quest markers do, the little question marks over there, the viewpoints, they all have their markers, so it kind of seems redundant to have both on there. The game is giving you two lots of the same information. On top of this, the game will show you your level, because for some reason you need a permanent reminder of what level you are. It will also tell you if mercenaries are after you and how wanted you are by how many. And in my opinion, you don't need to know that information necessarily. And what I mean by this is that Assassin's Creed Rogue had a very similar system, but only when you killed general NPCs, you would end up having these mercenaries come and hunt you down. However, it did it in a way better way of just not telling you all the time, and you just had them randomly appear. Which in my opinion is a better system than what we got within this game, where it's permanently telling you how many people are after you all the time, as if you actually need to know this. Now the last part of what I think is bad about this is again the factor that they're telling you what quests you have going on. Now for some this might be good, which I can understand if you are someone who just kind of forgets easily, but for most players out there I would rather check my quest log for like 5 seconds when I load up the same quest again later on, or when I forget, than have it permanently take up 5% of my screen as if it actually needs to be there, and it just means that it's an extra thing for you to lose your immersion looking at. But now let's talk about RDR2, which like The Witcher 3 gives you a minimap as well, however I found it way less of an impact on my playthrough, typically only using it to find enemies if I couldn't see them. It also acts as a built-in compass on the minimap. So it ends up blending two things into one, and without truly distracting you from your display. Around the minimap you'll also be given your basic information such as your health, endurance, and so on. But it's way smaller than most games. And the last thing that I want to mention is ammo, and that's literally it. All of this information is given to you 99% of the time. The only little bit of extras really when you're roaming around is the little title cards telling you when you've entered a new town or state, and then info when you pick something up. So this game does what The Witcher 3 does, but with so much more nuance. Mainly that there's nothing garish standing out around the map. But it also condenses all of the extra information that you might need either around the minimap or within that top right hand corner. But the game with probably the best HUD out of all 4 of these games has to go to Elden Ring, more in particular when you're roaming around the game. Don't worry, I do think this game does have some faults within its UI design, which I'll get into shortly, however for now I want to give the game a little bit of praise. The main focus of this has to be the lack of information when you're just roaming around the map. All it provides you with is a compass, and when you're picking things up, it'll have a little bit of an indicator on your screen. This is simply amazing for most players who just want to roam around without being told where every single little thing is every 2 seconds, and it also gives players a sense of agency over what they're doing, whereas the previous 3 tell you exactly where most things are either on a minimap or small markers when you're going around the HUD. And some even go as far to literally do 2 lots of the same lot of information. So personally, this has to be one of my favourite choices that was made by the devs of this game. Each game allows more of your display to be dedicated to the world that you're exploring instead of the flow of information that's being given to you. Which for some might be a bad thing, however for many it allows people to have more of an experience of actually exploring the world which was designed by the devs. I would rather have a game that focuses on the drive to explore than just telling you where everything is. However, there is an issue with a game like Elden Ring, which is that it takes it a little bit too far at times. Now, as much as I love not being given too much information when you're roaming around a map, I do think Elden Ring takes it a little bit too far in 2 departments. One of which is definitely its HUD. Sure, the way this game is set up is that it attempts to push players to just explore the world, but it leaves many players just aimlessly wandering instead of actually finding anything. whereas in games like The Witcher 3 and Skyrim you'll have question marks or some unnamed locations to take you to, which in my opinion is a little bit better for the average player to make it more enjoyable for the time that you're actually getting within the world. They still feel as if they are finding things on their own, but they don't feel as if the little markers on their map from 3 miles away are just allowing them to auto-ride to them as if it's not them actually trying to find it. Instead, it's something that you stumble across when you glance at your compass or minimap when you're going to your next destination, which is by far way better than, let's say, just looking on your minimap after getting a viewpoint and seeing exactly where everything is. It's just labelled with question marks. And simply put, it allows players to find things without it feeling as if it's too hidden. With a game like Elden Ring, it is labelled as one of those games that require a wiki. And that is simply because a lot of the information that players might need requires a good amount of dedication to playing the game and running around the map, or extra information around the story and lore that isn't blatantly explained within the game itself, which for anyone who does try to argue the case, well, you know, you could just listen more during the game. Literally most games will have lore menus within a game where it will tell you things about different characters and so on. I think a game that does a really good job of this is Destiny with the Grimoire cards. Yes, for a very long time it was outside of the game, however, you can now look through most of them on the actual thing. However, it does bring me into the second issue within the UI design, which is a lack of a quest log. Now, I know for some players, they would say this is a great choice, but I would argue that for the majority of players out there, this causes more issues than it actually gains to give the player a sense of accomplishment. I don't see why a game wouldn't at least give you a quest log that tells you what the NPC has told you. When you leave the game for, let's say, a day or two because you don't have all the time in the world to play this game every single day, you're just going to be sat there thinking, what quest was I doing? To then go into your menu and have zero clue, which makes you hope that one day you might find that character that you spoke to understand what quest you were doing. Now, I don't think a quest log that takes you to the exact centimeter away from your location is going to be the answer, but the whole point of UI is to give the player information, and at some point, giving players less information can lead to bottlenecking many players' enjoyment of side content and just in general exploration. With that though, I wanted to now focus on what each of these games do when you encounter a combat scenario and what information is provided. This section might end up shocking some of you when it comes to this take, as this time it is going to be in a little bit of a different order of preferability. Now in this scenario, what I believe is the most pivotal thing is that the game is still giving you that information that you actually require, but isn't bombarding your screen with information that you simply don't need. So in last place, obviously, has to be Assassin's Creed Odyssey for this one. Why on earth is it that they're still telling you whilst you are in a combat situation everything that is within a 100-meter distance of you, and giving you all this information, which simply you just don't need? It seems like a lazy choice of Ubisoft that instead of disabling the compass and the markers telling you exactly where that blacksmith is down the road, whilst you're being backhanded by a Spartan, it just seems like a really odd choice to keep it all on there, when, you know, it could be a simple aggro interaction, aka we now disable the compass and the markers. It's literally something that other games do as well. The Witcher 3 is next for pretty much the same reason, which is that you just don't need the minimap to be telling you where every little thing is when you're in a fight. Because one big issue with minimaps is that they do provide way too much information, which drags your attention away from that current moment that you're meant to be dealing with. Which is something that I just don't understand the point of games that they need to be doing this. I don't see why they need to provide you with even more information when they're trying to capture you within the moment. But this next one is probably going to upset people, which is Elden Ring. I find that this game does the exact same sort of thing that other games out there do, obviously providing you with that necessary information. However, it also makes me feel as if I should just be playing with 1/4 of my screen having black bars over it because of how big the health, stamina, magicka, and items and enemy health bar on your screen is. It's just a bit absurdly big. All of it could have been made a lot smaller, like the items you're carrying around. Why is it that I have to look at an empty vase on my screen when it's got nothing in it? Things like the enemy's health bar, I find, however, is something that you can argue makes sense, but it could have been made a little bit smaller. But I get it, it is something that is a Souls inherent experience, but it seems like something that could have been streamlined a little bit better to have a nicer fit. Now this might make you think, how is Red Dead Redemption 2 at number 1, when it has the same issues that I mentioned about The Witcher 3 and its minimap? Well, it's because this game doesn't change between roaming and combat. It doesn't even show you your enemy's health bar, which to be fair is because RDR2 isn't meant to have bullet sponges, so obviously the game has zero reason for showing you it. The other big one is even though it does have a minimap, it gives you all of that information, including your health, ability charges, and location of nearby enemies, all tucked away within that same area. It's not all over the display as if they're needing to fill every single corner as if they're a Twitch streamer with their 8 sponsorships. With Red Dead Redemption 2, it felt like Rockstar were highly intentional with their choice, with what information they found was actually valuable to the player, but on top of that, they didn't want it to be something that interrupted the immersive experience that you were having. Whereas all the other games have big meaty health bars, as much stuff in every single corner that can be rammed in, or just oversized items in the corner of your display. All things that could either be smaller, be removed entirely, or if they didn't want to do that, just made it a feature that if you click the D-pad or a particular key on your keyboard, they would then pop up so it was more intentional on the player's experience. Within a single player experience, I want to be given information that is intentional and provides genuine info that is actually required and doesn't just bombard the player as if they are the dumbest sort of person on the planet. Another area within many games out there is going to be your skill tree, which something like Elden Ring just looks awful. It looks like a D&D spec list in my opinion. And personally, I find something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey's skill tree personally way better. It looks so much cleaner, so much more minimal. You could argue that it's, inherently not as minimal by, definition of just Elden Ring's numbers and so on, but it just looks better in my opinion. It actually shows you the abilities of what you're getting, what the stat points do, and so on. Whereas something like Elden Ring, in my opinion, I can see that people who are massive fans of stat points and grindy games would absolutely love it. It'll be their jam. But I would say for the average player out there, they would rather have a game that is at least making the UI seem more fun and in tune with the game's experience than something like Elden Ring, where it does just feel like you're moving some numbers around and you might see some differences. Now I want to spend some time on the other realm of games, the multiplayer genre, the one that is rarely talked about within the video essay market for some reason. Typically I think it's just that a lot of people look down on multiplayer games, or at least a lot of people within comment sections do. That's what I've seen more typically. However, I'm definitely going to make some videos in the future talking about multiplayer games if you're interested. However, I'm going to be talking about the HUDs within these games. In multiplayer games, typically you either have two types of categories, either no information survival-esque type FPSs, or your more competitive types or leaning towards that side where they give you a lot more information. Now I think the best way of talking about this is going to be talking about the three big dogs within the FPS market, or at least two of the big dogs and one that completely flopped entirely on its, back, belly, whatever you want to say it's fallen onto, is CSGO, Halo, and Call of Duty. Three of the biggest staples within the entire FPS genre, and all take similar approaches with slight differences. Within FPS titles, you can actually get away with providing way more info at the expense of players' immersion, because most people aren't playing these sorts of games to get lost in the immersiveness of the game's experience, but typically the team communication. Or simply put, you want to be the best in the lobby, so you just sweat it. Within a multiplayer game, there are a few things that are required information. First is going to be your health, which is really interesting to see the difference between Call of Duty and other games. It's something that I've always known they've done, but until making this video I've never truly thought about. With CSGO, they simply tell you how much health you have within a percentage bar down at the bottom of your screen, which isn't necessarily important for one key reason, and that's the ability to one-shot headshot most people when you're attacking someone with an AK, or without a helmet with some other guns. However, this video isn't about the difference in gameplay changes, it's more specifically about the UI. However, that is something that I actually have thought more on, and I definitely want to make a video on how each game handles gameplay changes, or how it all interacts together, so let me know if that's something you're interested in. Halo Infinite, on the other hand, has a little bar that will then have a cracked little bit when you end up hitting down into your red lower health zone when your shield is broken, and it's made to make you aware of the dire circumstance that you're within. Call of Duty does something completely different. They don't show you a percentage bar, or even, a percentage of your health at all. It just shows you based off the blood on your display and the dampening of colour. Something that builds more of an intuition within the player than required info. So a game like Halo, when you are shot, you can obviously hear the crack when it happens. However, it still requires you to some degree to look at that health bar. The same way that if you actually have to think about your health within CSGO, you are forced to actually look down at that bit of your display to see how much health you're on. But in Call of Duty, it's completely based on the change in your display and picking up on the change of colour. It's something that you end up realising becomes more of an instinct within Call of Duty than, let's say, something like those games where you actually kind of have to think. You can build the instinct over time, however there's always going to be those moments where you think, what is my health? Whereas in COD, it all becomes a complete instinct. One big difference as well within many of these games is going to be showing you your enemy's health. Within all three of these games, they don't actually show you the enemy's health, which is kind of surprising when you think about the essence of many of these titles. However, something like CSGO obviously does show you how much damage you've dealt to a player once you've died, so that's kind of the only change in it. But with COD, it's again just learning and building your instincts, which can cause you from time to time to stop shooting before you've actually killed someone. Not sure if anyone else has been there, but yeah, whenever I play a new COD and they have like a slight change in the time to kill, it's something that always puts me off for like a good, probably I'd say 2-3 matches, but then eventually you get used to it. However, with Halo, they're still doing the same thing that they've been doing for years now, with games like Fortnite and Apex that use this as well, which is the blatantly cracked enemy shields features. So pretty much you know exactly when that enemy is almost dead because you can see the cracking of the shields. Personally, I do think Halo makes it a lot easier to learn. However, Call of Duty definitely makes everything built around this idea of making them habitual and making them into a form of instinct on the player, instead of necessarily having to learn based off a cracking moment of their shield or having to look at your health bar. All of it is built in to build the habit of playing, which I found really interesting. The next big one for any FPS out there is going to be your ammo, which all of these games do the same thing. They tell you what gun you're using, how much ammo is left in the weapon, and how much you have as your maximum capacity. One big difference that you'll see between Halo and Call of Duty is that they're going to tell you to reload far more often than you're ever going to see ever within CSGO. And the reason is very obvious for many people who have played CSGO or any competitive shooter like it, which is that 5 shots in COD is just not the same as having 1 shot in CSGO. When you shoot a burst in COD or within Halo, you might take off half the person's health, whereas in CSGO, 1 shot could eliminate your teammates, and that reload time between you reloading and finally being able to actually spray and pray actually could be the wrong time and the enemy comes right round the corner because they hear you reloading. So with games like Halo and COD, they try to use the HUD to instill into the player some form of habits of reloading. So within every single COD commentary video from 2013, you would have seen everyone insta-reloading after they got a kill, because it became extremely intentional on the developers to build these habits into the player, so it never felt like you were actually playing. It felt like you were just one with the systems of the game. Now though, that thing that I was saying was absolutely awful within single-player games, I absolutely love within multiplayer games, and that is the minimap. Mainly because they give you so much information that can make you an absurdly dangerous opponent to go up against, versus anyone who isn't acquainted with the power of the minimap. This is probably one of the few cases that I love minimaps within games. However, within multiplayer games, it can give you a massive advantage over other players. A good Call of Duty player, for example, will be looking at their minimap 60% of the time, but a good CSGO player will know when it's necessary to check on it and when you shouldn't do. However, one thing that I do think is a little bit odd within some of these games is the massive areas of game info that, in my opinion, just isn't necessarily needed. We don't need to know necessarily how many points either team has when you're playing Slayer or Domination, it's just not required. The only times that it's necessary, in my opinion, is when you're playing the likes of CSGO, which is an actual competitive setting where those points matter. However, one big area that I haven't spoken on just yet is the UI navigation in these menus. Within the likes of multiplayer games and Ubisoft single-player titles pretty much solely, there's very few other single-player titles out there that have these bad navigations, and you know why they're like it. Maybe it's the case that it isn't bad navigation, you might think that, but how come it is that every single multiplayer game out there, almost every single one I would say, always seems to make you pass the microtransaction areas, the battle passes and so on your way to your settings menu, or on your way to any other menu that's not your home screen? The Battle Pass is mostly what you end up seeing within a lot of these multiplayer titles, as it will be rammed down your throat as a way to try and interact with it in some way. Now, this isn't a video discussing Battle Passes. There is plenty of creators who have done great videos about Battle Passes. I might dabble in it myself at some point in the future, but for now, it's just not something that piques my interest. The reason though that I've had to bring them up and microtransactions is that they're put into a massive area on your screen typically. When you load up a game, they'll tell you about buying the new battle pass or buying the new microtransaction. And they're always very easy to find, whereas some settings in some games can be really hidden behind certain settings that you're like, why is it so hidden to try and just change one particular thing with my controller? However, one of the big reasons why I'm mentioning it is that they can heavily affect your gaming experience, as it does one of two things. It can either incredibly annoy you, or it can make you have a massive sense of FOMO that hopefully leads you to buying their product. But yeah, overall, I just find that the multiplayer setting within microtransactions, there is a reason why, in my opinion, games like Call of Duty, the HUDs just seem a bit all over the place now in comparison to playing Black Ops 2. Black Ops 2 used to just click multiplayer. You then would click your game mode and you would be in searching for a lobby. Whereas in the new Call of Duty, you load it up and it's acting as if it's a game with like 20 different games built in when it doesn't need to. It then has 20,000 types of microtransactions that you can buy. The UI within the menu system of almost every multiplayer game is so cluttered now and so just all over the place, primarily because, in my opinion, I think it's done in an attempt to confuse many players, and it makes you kind of stumble onto that menu where you see those cool looking outfits and so on. To me, I do think a lot of it is probably done in a malicious way to try and get people to buy things. However, again, if it works, it works. If you want to buy microtransactions, you do so. However, it is just the case of be aware that there is a reason why all these things are placed the way they are. These companies have people there, the same way that social media companies have people who work there who have worked within gambling. They know what gets people. And bad UI, or at least UI that is made specifically to get you to buy things, is bad UI in my opinion. Like, that's, at least in my opinion, in terms of a pro-consumer standpoint. But in the pro, money making, it's definitely a good one. But yeah, just don't fall for the tricks of many of these things out there. Try and think before you go to buy that new Fortnite skin of John Wick, which I definitely don't have. I definitely didn't buy that when it came out. I don't know what you're on about. But anyway, on to the rest of the video. Multiplayer games with bad UI are normally down to two things. One is that they have a massive HUD that takes up way too much of the display, or just simply put, doesn't add anything to the gameplay loop. Whereas a single player title with a bad UI is giving the player way too much information and normally ends up causing most single player experiences that are meant to be immersive become more like running around an MMORPG instead of looking for that single player story experience that you were after. Now, what I mean by many of these things is that within something like multiplayer games, I feel like they can get away with heavy amounts of information to the player because the whole point of many of these games is that they're meant to be competitive. Competitive games giving you more information is actually a bonus, whereas in a single player game, you're not competitive. There is no reason to have all of the information that you get thrown at within something like Odyssey, where they're doubling up information to the player. Whereas, when you're playing a single player game, you're playing RDR2 and you're just there trying to embrace the world. And even with an Odyssey, to just embrace the world. Why am I being told about the vendor who's just down the road and I'm being shown it on my display and then also on the compass? It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, it is just the case that some games can have amazing UI where they don't do too much, but they do just enough. And I think a game like Ghost of Tsushima is a great example of this. They embrace those elements within, let's say, the actual UI experience of the displays and menus within something like Assassin's Creed, where in my opinion, like the basic Assassin's Creed menus within something like, just going between your map, your skills and so on, that's all perfectly fine. It actually is probably up there as some of the better ones. Where it does better than Assassin's Creed is the fact that, when you're roaming around, you're not being blared out with loads of information. You're not being told about everything every 2 seconds. You can obviously track things, use the wind to, take you to them, but the wind feels way more natural than your horse chasing after one specific thing, or the fact that you're chasing after that golden point on your compass. It just feels a lot more natural than something like Ghost of Tsushima versus something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. UI can make or break a gaming experience. This video isn't here to give you the answer into what you should find as a good option. However, it's simply here to explain a little bit of the nuances of what I would consider good UI, from things like the minimap experience and how that can change the game and how you play it. And a good video to watch on this is Razbutton's video. If you're watching this, you've probably watched that video before, but he has got an outstanding video talking about how minimaps are just too powerful. It's something that I'd love to do myself, but I don't want to copy too much, I don't want to do too much of that, copy-paste activity. However, I'd love to do something and try and put my own little spin on it. And the big issue within minimaps within single-player games is that they just become too useful. They give you too much information. For example, I was talking about this very video to my friend on a walk recently, And we were talking about how, the differences with Elden Ring. He gave me some of his thoughts, and then we talked about the minimap. And he was talking about how one of his big issues, and I had this as well with The Witcher, is that you're wandering around the map and you're just sat there thinking, wow, there's a thing over there, let me go chase that thing that I've seen on my minimap. Instead of, either wandering to it or just not even knowing what it is at all because there's a question mark. Everything just becomes a chase of that little thing on your minimap, instead of freely roaming around and finding something on your own. However, with a multiplayer game, it's a completely separate experience. It's something that can make you a better player when you get given the information from your minimap. I didn't want to tell you what you should prefer, as many of you might prefer Ubisoft's approach to UI, where it actually tells you a lot of stuff, and it makes it so that you're not wasting your time trying to find everything that you might be doing within something like Elden Ring. But for many of us out there who want to get wrapped up within the world that you're exploring, and actually feel as if you are exploring it intentionally, this is something that just doesn't work. Many will tell me in the comments, and I guarantee you this, to anyone who's made it this far, I'll be surprised if you don't scroll down and see something like this. I guarantee you in the comments, I'm going to see the words saying, you can just turn off the HUD, However, that's not the point. It is true, but it isn't the point. The way the game plays out the box is the way that the developers intended you to play the game, as they believe it adds to the experience or gives you some benefit in some way. However, for many of these, it could strike the perfect blend of feeling that drive to explore, but actually providing you information that is required, but not overly giving you too much within that realm. And again, like I said, Ghost of Tsushima does an amazing job within the UI department. It doesn't bombard you with information when you're roaming around, it just allows you to explore, or at least makes you feel as if you're exploring. So you might see a question mark on your map and you allow the trail to take you there. It has the guided winds that take you, and it doesn't make you feel as if you're following the beaten path. It actually makes you feel as if you are stumbling to it. It kind of reminds me in a way how Dishonored feels as if you've got tons of options, when in reality it's just that the game devs developed the world in such a way that makes you feel like you've got tons of options, when in reality you don't actually have thousands of options, it just feels like it does. Ghost of Tsushima is kind of the open world variant of that. Within the multiplayer setting though, I think a series like Call of Duty have actually done a great job with their HUD design to make a key part of the player experience become more ingrained as a habitual and instinctual experience than needing to double check everything every second. But obviously, all multiplayer games have flaws within the rest of their UI. They're incredibly clunky, they've got cheap little tactics to try and get you to buy their battle passes, with pop-ups about microtransactions every 2 seconds, or telling you about that level up and how you could have got this thing from the battle pass if only you had bought it. And for any Destiny players out there, you understand the experience of when you load up and then it's got like 5 different notifications that it's going to tell you one after the other when you thought you got rid of it, and it's just going to be like, buy this silver, oh by the way this new pack's released, by the way the DLC's coming out, oh buy this silver again, and it just does it over and over again. Becomes very annoying, and that's all a part of UI. It's all a choice by the devs to put this into your user interface. UI can change the way that you play games, which is why devs need to be incredibly intentional with the placement and choice of information they're going to be providing to the player during their playthrough. A Ubisoft title typically provides a bit too much info, whereas Elden Ring provides a little bit too little. I think the perfect blend that I did mention is something like RDR2, where it still leaves moments of mystery in its traversal, but it isn't necessarily like you're having to grind to find every single little thing. And the last thing that I'm going to leave you with is that I've found that the UI can affect the way that you play games, or at least it affects the way I play games, down to one big thing. That is immersion. When you're playing a game, you don't want random pop-ups to try and drag you away from the thing that you're experiencing. You don't want to be comparing stat points all the time to see if you're going to have any significant change. You want to feel as if you are within that world and you're exploring that world. You don't want to feel as if you're constantly knowing, ah yes, I am within the gaming world, I am playing a game. You always know that you're playing a game, however you want to get as close as you can to being disconnected from your own reality. Now, that all being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and do subscribe for more content moving forward. I'm making more video essays anyway throughout the year. As many of you know, I changed the channel to become video essay only, so plenty more to come. The next one I think will be interesting, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And I'm working on my Ghost of Tsushima video essay, so that'll be out hopefully over the next month or two. No promises though, just because of my capture card. It's a bit all over the place right now. But yeah, if you did enjoy the video, let me know down below. And yeah, I personally think that the beginning half of this script is probably the best script I've done in a very, very long time. Let me know what you think anyway. And I'll see you guys in the next one, whenever that might be. If you are interested in supporting the channel and you want to see some extra content from me, or you want to see videos like this a little bit earlier, you can always check out my Patreon, where you can talk to me one-on-one within my messages. But on top of that, there'll be Q&As in there, early access to videos like this, like I just said. You also get to vote on some existing content that will be getting released at some point soon. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Have a good day.